Now, my second lecture on the historical books is going to cover the Chronicler's history and later histories. So these are part of what Jews call the writings. So they divide their Bible into the law, the prophets, the writings in Hebrew, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, which is TNK, and since you can't pronounce TNK, they put in two A vowels, which gives you Tanakh, which is what Jews call their Bible. The Chronicler's history consists of 4 books, Ezra and Nehemiah, originally 1 scroll, and 1 and 2 Chronicles. It was written a century or two after the Deuteronomistic historian, perhaps about 450 to 400 BC. The order of events in Ezra and Nehemiah is disputed. Ezra comes first in the Bible, but some of the events narrated in Nehemiah might be earlier than the story of Ezra. It's Saint David. The chronicler omits the stories about David as a thug. He omits the long years of conflict between Israel and Judah after the death of Saul. David becomes king immediately upon Saul's death over all Israel. He omits the story of David's adultery with Bathsheba. He portrays David as establishing the temple liturgy before his death. In fact, it was Solomon who set it up, but all of this is attributed to David, assigning different people to do different jobs after he dies. The image is of Israel as a holy people. There is a Jewish tradition that it was Ezra the scribe who put the Torah, the books of Moses, into its final form. And the atmosphere is circle the wagons. Think of the Catholic Church after the Reformation. There was a certain amount of xenophobia in the worldview of the chronicler. They had just gone through this terrible exile, and it was because they had been led astray to worship foreign gods. So now they don't want to have anything to do with foreigners. And Ezra insists that those who have returned from exile divorce their foreign wives. Many scholars think that the book of Ruth was a reaction to Ezra and his policies. Ruth is also one of the writings. The author of Ruth points out that the great-grandmother of King David was a Moabite woman. If Ezra's policy had been in force prior to the exile, King David never would have been born. Jonah is probably also a reaction to Ezra. Everybody remembers the story of the fish, but the key is the final chapter. Nineveh has repented. This is how we know Jonah is not the story of a real prophet. Nineveh was the 8th century equivalent of ISIS, except for it was much more powerful. So it would be like as if I would go to ISIS and preach, and they would say, that was such a convincing sermon that we're going to stop terrorism and we repent of our evil ways. We're going to be good now. Well, Jonah goes and preaches to Nineveh, and everybody from the king on down repents. That's how we know he's not a real prophet. As Jesus said, which of the prophets did your ancestors not stone? Someone could have said Jonah, but the fact was that probably everybody realized it wasn't that historical. At the last chapter, Jonah is pouting. He's sitting outside the city waiting to see what happens. A vine is giving him shade, and a worm destroys the vine, and now Jonah is angry. And God says, are you angry, Jonah? He says, I'm angry enough to die. I knew that you were merciful. I knew this was going to happen. I knew if they repented, you would spare them. And that's why I tried to get away the first time. I knew how merciful you are. And now, look what happened. Now my enemies are going to live. So he's really ticked off. And the Lord said, you pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left? and also much cattle. So in response to the narrow nationalism, the author of Jonah stresses God's compassion even for Israel's enemies. The Protestant idea is if only we could get back to the Bible, everything would be fine. But the fact is that even within the Bible, there are different perspectives. Ruth and Jonah, one perspective toward foreigners, Ezra with another. Then there are deuterocanonical historical books, 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Now this is not like 1 and 2 Samuels, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles. In those, the second book picks up where the first left off. I give you kind of a graphic there. 1 Maccabees, then 2 Maccabees, then 1 Maccabees. One is within the other. 1 Maccabees tells a big story. 2 Maccabees begins after 1st Maccabees begins, and it ends before 1st Maccabees ends. And they're written by very different authors. 2nd Maccabees is a Reader's Digest version. The author states that his story will tell how Judas Maccabeus and the martyrs resisted the tyrant King Antiochus. Then he states, all this detailed by Jason of Cyrene in 5 volumes, we will try to condense into a single book. He has a 5-volume source that he's going to put into a single book. The conclusion, he says, since Nicanor's doings ended in this way, with the city remaining in possession of the Hebrews from that time on, I will bring my story to an end here too. If it is well written and to the point, that's what I wanted. If it's poorly done and mediocre, that's the best I could do. Now, a question on inspiration. Does this author feel like he's being inspired by God? Many fundamentalists have the verbal dictation model of inspiration. My favorite cartoon was in Catholic Update decades ago. There's this guy with a quill pen. He's an ancient scribe, and he's got a headset on, and the wire's going up. And it's like God is dictating to him every word. That's called the verbal dictation model of inspiration. And this is a passage in the Bible that shows that there are problems with that model of inspiration. And it appears that it is possible to be divinely inspired and not even be aware of it. And there are also New Testament passages that illustrate the same thought. But that will bring this part of our lecture to an end.